Welcome back and thank you for joining A Shark's Perspective. I am Kenneth Shark Kinney, your host and Chief Shark Officer. First, let me tell you about two amazing sponsors who make this show possible. Let's talk about Inbound. From marketing to sales and commerce to CX, Invoca's active conversation intelligence platform enables revenue teams to create better buying experiences, drive more leads, and increase revenue. Trusted by top brands like Dish Network, Mayo Clinic, Mutual of Omaha, and ADT, the Invoca team is doing some amazing work in turning conversational data into automated action to enhance digital touchpoints and human interaction. Now let's talk about Outbound. I hope that you'll take a look at Drips, the founders of conversational texting, where they use conversational AI to reach customers where they're most responsive, and that's on their phones. And working with major brands like 3 Day Blinds, Liberty Mutual, Credit Repair, and Gainsco, Drips is leading the way for some of the biggest brands in the world to improve engagement rates and outcomes for their prospects and customers. Thank you to Invoca and Drips. And now back to the show. What makes you distinctive, whether it's your corporate brand or even personal brand, say as a speaker, coach, or similar? Knowing that consumers have choices, what is your process for creating an iconic and distinctive experience that helps someone choose your brand over that of someone else? It's a question we should all ask, especially post-pandemic, to know if we're not only distinctive, iconic, provide a great customer experience, but even now if we're still relevant. Scott McKain is a keynote speaker, CSP, a member of the Professional Speakers Hall of Fame, a member of the Sales and Marketing Hall of Fame, and the author of 7 books, including Iconic: How Organizations and Leaders Attain, Sustain, and Regain the Ultimate Level of Distinction. And on this episode, we'll discuss iconic organizations and creating distinction, both as a corporate brand and as a speaker, creating the ultimate customer experience. 2 big principles: promise and performance, Taxi, Terry, and Uber Steve, Werner Herzog movies for German television beloved by Roger Ebert, John Cougar Mellencamp, the FFA, So God Made a Farmer, The Kindness of Zig, Distinctive Sharks, Colts quarterbacks, That Radio Voice, and a lot more. So let's tune in to an iconic Hall of Fame speaker with an iconic shark who's probably already in the Shark Hall of Fame anyway, on this episode of A Shark's Perspective. Scott, thank you so much for joining us today on A Shark's Perspective. I've known of you and followed you, read some of your books before, but tell us a little bit about your background and your career to date.
Kenneth, I appreciate you asking. I love talking about my hometown. I'm from a little tiny town just north of Louisville, Kentucky. It's on the Indiana side, Crothersville, Indiana, and I'm so grateful to have a chance to spread the word about Crothersville and to have been from there. Because one of the great things, as you know, one of the great things about growing up in a small town, when you grow up in the big city, you kind of got to pick one thing to do. At Crothersville, you had to be in sports and a member of FFA and working in your dad's grocery store, and doing chores on the home farm. You were expected to do so many things, and there are advantages both ways, but I think there's something about growing up in a small town that gives you the chance to pursue more diverse activities, and also you're expected to deal with and know how to deal with adults from an early age, and so that got me on my way. I was a national and state president, national officer and state president of FFA, which back then was Future Farmers of America. Now, because how it's changed, it's just FFA because there's so many urban programs in all the aspects of agribusiness. But it gave me the opportunity to speak and to travel and to meet some amazing people, and it changed my life. I mean, until this happened, I didn't know much of the world beyond Southern Indiana and Louisville and Indianapolis, and man, just the privilege that it was to do that and change my career goals and so I went to college, graduated from college. The college hired me to work. I realized from the compensation that higher education was not the place that I wanted to spend the rest of my life, and got involved in broadcasting. But I just
places to deliver a speech.
Yes, exactly. It's part of what I know we'll talk about is that repetition and just putting in your reps is everybody's looking for the hack today. And I get it. I mean, everybody wants to hack this and hack that as a shortcut. And there is something to be said for that. But on the other hand, I wouldn't want my cardiologist to have hacked his way to my bypass. I don't want to think that they did
just watch it on YouTube.
Yeah, exactly. I did a weekend boot camp and watched a bunch of videos in YouTube, but man, I hacked this and I'm ready to go. I mean, there are certain things that at the end of the day, you have to put in your reps. You have to pay your dues. And I don't mean that to sound like an old guy saying, hey, in my day. I think there is something that can't replace repetition and experience. And it doesn't mean that you can't, it used to be called OPE, other people's experiences. I think you can shorten your learning curve, but I don't think you can eliminate it. And that was it. So anyway, along the way, married a wonderful woman, and unfortunately, as we were talking before we went on here, she passed away from cancer, and my business was in the toilet. I'd taken time off to be a caregiver. I had no bookings. It was just a tough time, and I thought I gotta, and I was way in debt from the medical bills that were left over, and I just thought, man, I gotta pull on my big pants and get to work here. And I thought, what can I do? How do I stand out? I called speakers bureaus, right? That book folks like you and me for speeches. And I said, hey, when you recommend me, what do you say? Jeff Bezos said, your brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room. Well, obviously you can't be in the room and hear it, but the second best thing is to say, when you recommend me, what do you say? And their number one answer was a good speaker and a nice guy. Now, look, I work hard to be a good speaker. I want to be a nice guy. I choose to be a nice guy, but no meeting professional is going to sit there. No customer or prospect is going to say, let's do business with a really nice guy. Let's book a really nice gal, right? They want something. They have to buy something. They have to buy content. So I started looking about how I could make my business distinctive. And it was really hard at that point to find material. And the blinding flash, the obvious was, if I can't find this, that must mean it's true for other businesses as well. And so I devoted the rest of my life to studying, for lack of a better way to put it, the process of selection, the process of standing out. When someone chooses to listen to this podcast, Kenneth, or when someone chooses you or I to speak, it's not that they just choose us. They choose us instead of all these other alternatives that are out there in the marketplace.
Amen.
And so if we don't stand out, why would they choose us? And that's what I got fascinated about. What was the process that it took to create the ability to stand out?
Well, you live in a great town now for speeches, as evidenced by the Vegas background there. When you became a speaker, how long have you been speaking now as a professional speaker? How many years?
Well, I went full time way back in 1981. And then I shut the business down for a while to be, the caregiver for my wife. But I've been involved in the business since then.
I haven't been that long, but I completely get the stories because I've run through the same thing twice now, and the importance of family. But at what point do you think you became a distinctive speaker? I know from at least what I know of your career, it was the Taxi Terry story, because it's such a great story that I've heard. But was there something about you that became more distinctive as a speaker, specifically a story that elevated your game and recognition in the speaking world?
Well, I appreciate what you said, Kenneth. Yeah, people, the old business question is, what keeps you awake at night? Part of what keeps me awake at night is if I'd been standing one person behind and Taxi Terry would have picked up the guy in front of me.
Yeah. Uber Steve is not quite as good of a story.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't, but I think for me, it was a speakers bureau called, and this is not a speech story, but a speakers bureau called and said, we don't get any calls. This is several years back, but they said, we don't get any calls about distinction. We don't get any calls about speakers for differentiation. For goodness sakes, could Scott go give this speech on sales and goals? The real generic thing. And I said no. And that, to me, looking back, was one of the most pivotal moments of my career, because all of my career before had been, I was a good speaker and a nice guy, right? If you needed a speech about time management, I don't know anything about time management, but I figure I'll have to learn about it between now and when you want me to give the speech, right? I mean, I was a mile wide and an inch deep, and focusing on one thing and being willing to say, no, I don't do that anymore. that moment was the single most important, because you can't differentiate what you can't define. If you can't say, this is who I am, which also means I've got to say, this is what I am not, then you can't create enough clarity in the marketplace to be known for anything. And it wasn't, and the other thing, Kenneth, and what a great question you asked, because the other thing is, when you say, was there a moment? Well, there was a moment then, but part of what you have to continue to do is maintain your relevancy. And I don't ever want anybody in an audience to say, man, you should have heard Scott 10 years ago. He was really good then. I work at it constantly because I want to be, I've got so much room to grow. We all do.
That's a question for everybody right now coming out of the pandemic.
Yeah.
Is what they were talking about up to March of 2020 still relevant? I think it's interesting, though, because the 7 Tenets of Taxi Terry was your 4th book. Yeah. And so I've known of you as a top-notch speaker in this business for what seems like 4 or 5 decades, but that is interesting to me that was your 4th book. You just you don't think about the times when Zig Ziglar was struggling like everybody else to get a story that resonated.
It's funny you say that. One of my mentors, I had 2 mentors in the speaking business, and one was a guy named Charlie Willie. And Charlie, old time speaker. I mean, he was one of the first full-time professional speakers, out there. And he used to talk about that he and Zig and Jim Rohn did a tour of Australia together, the 3 of them, and just, the 3 of them in a rental car and staying at bad hotel. And it just blows your mind to think about Zig, driving a rental car through Australia to get to a Motel 6 to do a thing in front of 20 people. But yeah, and that's, it's just like, it's kind of funny. It's, I did movie reviews for a number of years, and it's speaking is a lot like that. And I think, but I think this applies to all businesses. I'm not just talking about speakers, is that our customers only see the best. We were talking about music before we went on here, and I've got some friends in the music business, and when their fans see them are the best moments. It's when they're on stage and their hair is perfect and the show is on and the lights are on, and they don't see you riding the bus for 12 hours to get there, and all of it, and the family upset at them because they're on the road all the time, or all that kind of thing. And that's as it should be. Our customers shouldn't have to see all of the things that we do to get to that finished product. But yet we can never forget that the only way that we have a very finished and polished product is to go through all that stuff that the customer should never see.
Well, another thing about your background before we get a little more into iconic and distinction, but obviously your voice resonates with a lot of people. It's a little bit of an unfair advantage for anybody interviewing you, especially when I've got sinus issues right now. But
you sound awesome, man.
Other than the voice, how did you get involved with Strazik?
Wow.
This show that Roger
Ebert.
Yeah, Roger Ebert. You get involved in this show about an alcoholic man recently released from prison. Joins his elderly friend and a prostitute in a determined dream to leave Germany and seek a better life in Wisconsin. Like, I don't even know when they come to you with that idea, if you're wanting to get to be on a show, it sounds great, but how did you get involved with that?
Oh, what a great question. Okay. So I was the banquet speaker at the awards program for the World Livestock Auctioneer Championship.
Wow.
They had a contest for the best livestock auctioneer. And then they have the awards banquet, right? So they asked me to be the speaker that night. And I'm still in college. I mean, it was great, right, to go do this. Hershey, Pennsylvania, they put me up. I had a summer job. I took 2 of my buddies. We went to Hershey, rode the roller coaster, the whole bit. So I get there and they said, hey, there's this German guy and he's doing a documentary about our group. So you're going to see this guy run around camera. So I've always been fascinated by that. So I introduced myself, and it's a guy named Werner Herzog. Well, at that point, he was, I didn't know who he was. We really hit it off. We ended up going out and getting a beer, after the banquet's over, everything. So I go back to college. Never thought another thing about it. It was going to be a documentary for German television. Get a call in my dorm room. How they tracked me down, I got no idea. Get a call in my dorm room, and it was a bad connection. And I hear this voice in German, very thickly accented, saying, I want to know if you want to come to Wisconsin and play the villain in a movie.
Oh.
I got a buddy in Wisconsin who is a great friend and one of the great practical jokers of all time. Naturally, I assume this is Garrett DeBruin calling me. I didn't hear the name. So my response is, wouldn't it be easier to come to Indiana and kiss my
right
rear? And you can tell this is typical movie director. It was like take two. He just started over. He didn't laugh. He didn't say, why did you say that? He didn't say anything. He said, it just started over. This is Werner Herzog. And I wanted to, oh my gosh, right? So I go to Wisconsin, and that's where we filmed it. And I play the guy in this movie. And I said later, how did you, I don't act. How did you do? And he said, speaking, the difference in speaking is you wrote your speech, you practice your speech, you deliver your speech, you're the director. I figured if you could do all of those roles, you could certainly come up here and just say what I tell you to say. And I never really thought about that before. And it was interesting. The Boston Globe named my scene the most memorable moment in film for the entire year. And Roger Ebert said it was one of the 50 great movies in the history of the cinema and all that. But it's so weird that something I did as a college student, Kenneth, not a week goes by that I don't get an email from somebody somewhere in the world saying, are you the banker in Strasik? It's used in film schools. My godson went to film school, and they showed it as an example of how you can make a great movie on a low budget, and that it was just a thrill. And I had the chance, Ebert reunited Herzog and me not long before Ebert passed away. And it was just, I told him how much the film had changed my life. And the cool thing was, and my wife Tammy was there, he started crying, and he said, and it changed my life too. So it was really cool.
And it's available on Amazon Prime. So
yeah, it is. Yeah. And TMC, Turner Classic Movies,
nice.
Had it on the other night, which was that was weird too. Because there are certain movies for me, like Tombstone is a movie. If I'm flipping channel and Tombstone's on, I'm done. It doesn't go. So it's weird to be sitting there as a guy, typical guy, flipping channels, and all of a sudden there I am.
Yeah, really
surreal, but it was a great experience.
Well, then let's shift over then and talk a little bit about distinction. So back in 2018, you wrote this outstanding book, Iconic, that I think had a real impact on a lot of people. I know you've carried that out in your conversations as well. When you look at where we are today, several years later, especially when you think about where customer experience and distinction and making a brand iconic has changed, especially because of the digital era and the e-commerce channels that people embraced during the pandemic. How does somebody, really make their brand iconic now? How do leaders create that as well in their employees now that we're coming out of the pandemic and it's a new mindset, if you will? I'm not necessarily saying rethink your marketing or brand or distinction or everything else, but there are some real things that are challenges today that didn't exist 2 years ago when it was already challenging enough.
Kenneth, I think other people would be better at responding to that than I, because there's certainly blinders I would have on as the author. But one of the things that I've heard from a lot of folks about it is it's like everything is more amplified. One of the things I think that happens as times change is that some of the principles that we needed to be executing then become more important now. Look, there's certain things that, for example, there's certain things that are as valuable as still having a page on MySpace. We don't need to be doing that anymore. But there are other things. I mean, when you look at the 5 factors of iconic performance, if I was starting today to write the book, I wouldn't change a single one of those factors. But I would say that some of those factors are certainly amplified. Let me give you one example.
Great point.
One of the things I say in the book is that the only 2 factors that a customer will judge you on is promise and performance. Now, it really goes deeper than that. It's what's the perceived promise? How do they evaluate your performance? There's a lot of nuance to that. But basically, what did you promise? And then how did you deliver on the promise that you've made? I think what's happened is that customers coming out of the pandemic their sensitivity is heightened. Some places failed them during this time. They wouldn't do what it would take to serve their customers. And so they were still making the same promise, but the performance dropped. There are others that raised their promise and couldn't deliver, and they got burned by that. So I think what's happened is those principles have become even more important. The principle, one of the ones that really shocked me was that iconic professionals and iconic organizations go negative. Doesn't mean they're negative people. Doesn't mean they have a negative philosophy, but they aren't afraid of bad news, because the only way they realize they get better is to fix the process. Look, I've made this mistake. I think we all have in a certain business. Customers got a problem. What do? We do whatever it takes to make that customer happy. Then we move on. We just keep moving on, not thinking that for that customer that complained, there might be 20 more that didn't say anything to us. We got a process problem we got to solve. We got to really go negative and drill deep into what's wrong. And most businesses aren't willing to do that. Most individuals aren't willing to look themselves in the mirror and say, man, I got to fix this. We just want to put the Band-Aid on it. And iconic organizations don't do that. They're willing to listen to the bad news and figure out what's wrong and go deep. And I think that's even more critical now in a post-pandemic marketplace than it has been before.
You said you thought other people could articulate that better. I'm trying to think of one who could have said it any better than that.
Well, you're very kind. I find it hard sometimes. It's kind of like it's like an actor would say after a movie when what do you think of your performance? It'd be like me saying to I don't know, pick an actor, Michael Keaton. What did you think of your performance in Batman? Does it stand up? And I think a performer would say, well, I think that's for the audience to decide. One of the things I'm a big believer on, Kenneth, is the marketplace decides. And I've learned this the hard way, because there have been books I've written and speeches I've prepared, and I thought, man, this is going to be the biggest thing ever. And you get crickets in response. And then you have like the Taxi Terry story. I honest to goodness thought it's a good story. It's okay. And man, I told it and the audience went crazy, and people are coming up afterwards and asking questions and stuff. And I never imagined I would continue to be telling that story. And I do. And you know why? Because the marketplace decides. There are certain things that, you've had that happen. There's certain things you think, man, look out, this is going to set the world on fire. And there's other things just kind of come along and, it takes off.
Yeah, those are stories that you just can't get away from, and you're worried that like it's going to be on your tombstone. Here's the guy that told the Taxi Terry story.
Yeah. I'm okay with that. I'm fine with that. But where I grew up in Southern Indiana, John Mellencamp used to play our dances at school and all that kind of thing. And John's pretty well known back home, saying he just couldn't believe that Jack and Diane was a hit. He and George Green had worked on Hurts So Good for months to make that the perfect rock song. And they just wrote Jack and Diane in an afternoon. And it was almost like he was upset that something he had worked so hard on was a hit, but something he hadn't worked on at all became an anthem. And then I think he got it. Yeah, he got his first couple of royalty checks and changed his mind. But at the end of the day, the marketplace decided, and that's something we have to understand. We pursue distinction and put it out there and do the best we can and differentiate ourselves in the marketplace. And then we need to listen to the marketplace and respond to what they find important.
So as someone who is as well known as you are in the speaking business and for delivering some A-list speeches across the world, how do you hope to educate the people in your audience to take what you've written out? Again, what we were talking about prior to getting started, you have a real focus on the speech, not just the packaging and delivery of it. Yeah. But when you have that right knowledge that you're trying to educate people with, how do you go about translating that into a speech that somebody will go back, take to their office, motivate their team, and change the world inside the house of their brand? How do you basically go about attempting to make that work for the audience?
That's a really insightful question, Kenneth.
That I did not articulate well.
No, you did. You got it. That's One of the things I believe is there are different roles for different presentations. If I have a 45-minute keynote, my job's to make you think. You know, I've always resisted the term motivational speaker because I believe that motivation is an inside job, as Zig used to say. You know, motivation starts within. So if the speaker was motivational, then everybody'd be motivated. And we know that's not the case. The speaker is the catalyst that gets somebody thinking, gets somebody motivated. It doesn't happen to everybody in the audience. It doesn't last forever, but it gets you thinking. So I've always thought my job with a 45-minute, 60-minute keynote speech is to really get you thinking to the point that you will pursue more information. Now, look, as a business person, I hope the information that you pursue comes from our company, comes from our organization. You know, you sign up for our Keynote Inner Circle, or you buy a book, or that's the business. But sincerely, I really want you to look for something, you know, to take it that next step and to get you thinking. Now, if I have a seminar, you know, of half day, that's to educate you. It's to get you to understand deeper the principles that we're talking about. If it's a training session, it's to change behavior. But that we're going to go through role plays, and that we're going to really dig deeper into, and we're going to look at, you know, where you are and where you want to be, and we're really it's more prescriptive. But at the end of the day, I don't know that you change behavior in a keynote speech. But what you can do is become the catalyst so that people change their own. And so what at least I believe from my research and from my experience and from my passionate belief is that the key to success in business is to stand out in the marketplace. And I want to give you some information based on the research of how you can do that. But my real goal is to get you, when you walk out of the room, thinking, you know, maybe I am like every other salesperson. How do I stand out? You know, I need to think about this a little more. Or maybe rather than tell you the features and benefits of my product, maybe I need to tell you a story about it. If I can get you thinking in that way, then hopefully you'll release the inner resources in your own motivation that's going to move you to do what it takes to reach that level of success. That's a long answer to a short question, but I hope that
it does. As we mentioned beforehand, I've spoken at several events in 2021 coming out of the pandemic. These were not stages of thousands. These were smaller events as we start to emerge out of this. And I started really thinking about the audience and how that's changed. I've watched, sort of as a student of human behavior, just watching how the audience reacts to the speaker that we may have not ignored, but may not have paid as much attention to when times were good and we had, you know, crowds of thousands. How do you regain the distinction, if you will, for your own speaking career? Granted, most of the people that are well known in this space that you know, that have known you for decades, they're going to employ you and put you in the seats. A lot of the major companies, you know, they're going to know who Scott McKain is, and these large brands are still going to pull in great keynote speakers like you. But to where you resonate with your own audience, to recapture what it is that makes you iconic, how are you looking at that to make certain that you're relevant to this new audience post-pandemic?
Kenneth, I think that is an important question for every speaker to ask themselves, and for every business. I mean, it's not just limited to speaking, you know, and that is, and you hit the word, relevancy. I mean, my buddy Joe Calloway says success means you know what used to work, right? Because it got you to this point, but it doesn't ensure that you're going to know what's great in the future. I'll give you a quick example. I used to walk on stage to the music of Small Town by John Mellencamp, right? Classic song. I would have, in the last year before pandemic, I'd have people come up to me and go, man, that was a good song. What song was that? Or I'd mentioned that I grew up in the same small town as John Mellencamp, the Small Town. Who's John Mellencamp? Now, it blows my mind that there is a segment of my audience that doesn't know, because I take that for granted. But that's part of relevancy. I mean, it's part of relevancy. And I have to ask, am I saying, not only am I making the right points, but am I saying it in the right language that the vast majority of my audience will know? May I give you one more? Do we have time for one more?
Yeah, we got
example?
time. Now, John Cougar Mellencamp was in BTS, right?
Yeah, exactly.
He was a K-pop guy. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's an unusual name for a South Korean, but it's I was speaking not long before the pandemic shut everything down, and it was a group of realtors. I don't know, 1,500 realtors, and there was a young guy in the front row who did not take his nose off the screen of his iPhone the entire time. I mean, he's just doing this. My entire talk. And, I always thought, man, eye contact is important. Or, if you look down, the audience is taking notes, man, that's what you want. But this guy's, he's playing on his phone, and I almost stopped and went, hey man, could you put that up? Just because everybody else has got great eye contact. But I thought, wait a minute, I remember standing on the stage thinking, why would I waste everybody else's time just so one guy puts down their phone, right? So I didn't say anything. So I go back up to the room. I'm putting my jeans on to fly back home. And I get on Twitter for a minute. And there were 18 tweets. There were quotes of my speech.
Yeah.
And that young man's picture next to it. And then about 4 tweets about, oh man, I love this guy's speech. He spoke to me.
That's a fantastic story.
And I thought, oh my gosh. For me, taking notes was always, this. For him, not only did he take notes like this, he shared it with everybody he knew. So the other aha to me is, how do I think my way's better? Because, I take notes at a meeting, then I come home, and I put it in the, man, he shared it with everybody. It benefited more than if I'm in a meeting and you're speaking and I write it down and I take it home, maybe nobody else gets that from me. And the ideas and the concepts he shared with everybody. And I realized, hey, just because it's the old way of doing things doesn't make it better. And just because it's a new way doesn't make it wrong. And I have to constantly be questioning that about myself, because I believe in reverse mentors. I have a 28-year-old mentor. Mentor always was the older guy or gal would teach us how to do things. I've got a mentor that's 28 years old, keeping me in touch with what's going on. And I just think it's awesome. I love it. I get so excited about what's happening and where we're going and what we can do. And I crave to continue to be a part of that.
Well, so what do you have on the horizon for new books? What's your big idea coming?
The book that is completed and is going to be coming out hopefully in about 3 months is called The Ultimate Customer Experience. I'm kind of going back to that for this reason. I am going to promise you there is nothing in the book that you don't know. But it is the thing that every CEO needs to make sure that every employee needs to know. And somewhere along the way, there is this gap between what the chief customer officer and the chief executive officer believe about the customer experience and how they are educating and teaching the people on the front line. And as hiring gets more difficult and gets more challenging, we got to make certain that the people that we're bringing on our team don't turn our customers off or turn them away. And so every book I've written before has been for entrepreneurs and leaders, right? I mean, that's who Iconic is geared for. If you were running a bank, you might buy Iconic and give to the branch managers maybe, but you're not going to give it to every teller. My publisher said, what if you wrote a book that, a small short book that they would hand to the tellers, or that you give to the frontline people? So it's a departure for what I've done. But I truly believe you can't be distinctive unless your frontline people are delivering that. So it is congruent with what I'm talking about.
Well, we're going to have to do this again in 3 months. So
I'd love to. That'd be great.
Well, Scott, you do at least have Shark Reef Aquarium there in Vegas at the Mandalay Bay.
Yes, we do. Yes.
Times, but I ask this of everybody who's been on my show. What is your favorite kind of shark and why?
Wow. First off, I have gone diving before. And a buddy of mine, Tom Hicks, has a dive shop back home in Indianapolis. And he got me in the bottom of a swimming pool and took me on a dive trip to Turks and Caicos. And
Yeah, beautiful.
man, I
Yeah.
am telling you what, it is just, if you haven't done it, people, I mean, you know what, diving may be the hardest thing for me to describe to somebody that hasn't had the experience.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
You know what I mean? I mean, I make my living with words, but I can't capture just, to me, it was like going to space. It's like being on
my
another
happy
planet.
place to get away from
Oh,
words.
it's gotta be. I mean, it's just so, I would say, just off the top of my head, my favorite shark is the hammerhead, because it is distinctive. And also, you know, I mean, I've had people say I'm kind of a hammerhead, that, you know, you just keep going, you just keep driving, you know. And so the hammerhead to me is the most distinctive of the sharks. And that's probably why I would pick it as my favorite.
Yeah, believe it or not, they certify a lot of divers, or you do some of your certification not that far from Crothersville, but Mermitt Springs.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So
I didn't know that. No,
yeah.
I did mine in Indianapolis at his shop up there. But
Yeah.
So
Well, Scott, it's a special time in the show. Are you ready for the 5 most interesting and important questions that you're going to be asked today?
Here we go. I'm ready.
Number 1, iconic companies. Your preference, Apple or Starbucks?
I would say Apple. And the reason I'm going to say Apple is I was an Apple fan when Apple was down for the count. And Starbucks has had a progressive growth. Part of what I love about Apple is they kind of lost their distinction, and then Steve Jobs is able to get it back. And it's harder to reposition than it is to position, right? I mean, to reposition, I got to get you to forget what you used to think about me and to start, you know, thinking something new. Starbucks was able just to establish a brand and build it and grow it progressively. So I love them both, but I would pick Apple.
All right. As an Indiana guy with an appreciation for history, Peyton Manning or Johnny Unitas?
Well, the other problem is Johnny Unitas played his college football in Louisville.
Okay.
So, you know, Louisville was 30 miles from home, but I would still go with Peyton. I know that's going to upset.
He's funnier than Johnny Unitas.
His commercials were much better. And the thing that Unitas did, it was extraordinary, but you got to remember that Indianapolis was a basketball town. I mean, football, we liked having an NFL team, but Indianapolis wasn't a football town until Peyton Manning. And there's a case that could be made that Peyton not only saved the Colts from moving out of Indy, he also made sure that the Pacers didn't, because it just elevated sports in the city. So I think Indianapolis owes a huge debt to Peyton. Unitas's career is phenomenal, but of the two, I'd lean to Peyton.
All right. Number 3, you're famously known for the Taxi Terry story, but graduating to a few years later, which is more iconic to you, Uber or Lyft?
Ooh, Uber, because I mentioned in Iconic that Uber, we talked about promise and performance earlier. Uber advances their promise and accelerates their performance. There isn't Lyft Eats. There isn't Lyft Health. You know, Uber is doing some things now, experimenting, saying that with senior citizens, one of the hardest things is getting to the doctor's appointments, but yet many senior citizens don't have smartphones. So Uber is working about how do you use a regular telephone to connect with Uber, and how do you get Medicare and Medicaid to pay for the transportation to get you to the appointment to see your doctor in a safe and efficient manner. I just think that they have, as I said, advanced their promise and accelerated their performance to a greater degree than Lyft has.
All right. Number 4, you're also known for your voice, but another 2 great speakers with great voices. Take your pick between Paul Harvey or Zig Ziglar.
Oh, man.
And I know why this hits home, because Paul Harvey was famous for If God Had a Farmer. And
you bet. And I was in the audience when that was recorded.
Really?
Yeah. That was recorded.
Super Bowl commercials, greatest speeches of all time.
Yeah.
Zig is always great, but I remember God Had a Farmer like it was yesterday.
And that was recorded at the National FFA convention. And I happened to be a kid in the audience and heard Paul Harvey in person.
what probably motivated you heavily to become a speaker.
It did. And however, I have to go with Zig. And here's the reason why. FFA asked me to come back and speak several years after I got out. And I'm an up and coming speaker, but not, I'm kind of working my way up the food chain. And I check in the hotel, and there was a message at the front desk, and it said, "Scott, report to room 1400 or call room 1400." And I'm like, I asked at the front desk, "Well, why am I supposed to call 1400?" They said, "Oh, well, that's Mr. Ziegler's room. He'd like for you to call it." I feel like a little league shortstop that gets a message, "Call Derek Jeter." I'm like, what? So I call, and he answers the phone in that voice that you just described. And he said, "Hey, I saw that you were speaking here, and I know you're NSA, National Speakers Association member. And hey, just want to know if you and your wife wanted to go to dinner tonight." Well, yeah, So we go to dinner, and Zig says, "Hey, Scott, I was also checking. I couldn't find your book. Where's your book?" And I said, "Well, Zig, I haven't written any books." And he said, "Yeah, I know what you mean. I haven't written any books either." Well, my wife and I look at each other like we have 7 on the shelf. What do you? He said, "But you know what? I get up every morning and I write 3 pages. And after about 6 months, somebody comes to me and says, 'You know what, Zig, you got a book.'" And then he just smiled. And I got up the next morning and I wrote 3 pages, and it was the first 3 pages of my first book. And he taught me that he just taught me so much. When my first wife passed away, about 2 weeks after she died, I walked to the mailbox, and there was a little box that said Ziegler Corporation. And I thought, oh man, how cool. Somebody sent me one of Zig's books. And I opened it up, and there was a handwritten letter from Zig. Now look, I wasn't on Zig's speed dial. I don't mean it to sound like we were, but that's the kind of person that he was. The best.
Number 5, and the most important question that you're going to be asked today is biscuits or cornbread?
Oh man, I'm a biscuits guy.
Even though you're from corn country.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm probably going to have to revoke my Indiana card. It's going to be my Hoosier card's going to be taken back. But I guess I grew up close enough to Louisville. The biscuits and gravy, man, that's
southern side of Indiana anyway.
Let me tell you how bad we are. My first wife was from Jeffersonville, Indiana, which is right on the border, right on the river. And when we first moved here to Las Vegas, the closest Cracker Barrel was a 2.5-hour drive away. And we made that drive about every other month to get Cracker Barrel biscuits and gravy.
They're fantastic. Well, so thank God somebody appreciates that context. Very few people appreciate the value of Cracker Barrel, where you can get a Dolly Parton CD, a T-shirt, and some damn good biscuits.
Absolutely. It's a trifecta.
It is indeed. It is indeed. Well, Scott, where can people find out more about you, grab copies of the books, see you on stages, and more?
It's very kind of you to ask, Kenneth. I appreciate it. Just go to scottmckain.com, and it's spelled a little differently. It's McKain, but at scottmckain.com, there's everything from folks who are looking for a speaker to we have a group called the Iconic Inner Circle. They can learn more about that. Links to getting the books on Amazon or Books A Million or Barnes Noble, wherever you prefer. It's all right there. Just go to scottmckain.com.
Scott, honored again for your time, and thank you so much for joining us on A Shark Perspective.
Thank you for the great questions. You've made my day, man. This has been fantastic. I truly appreciate it, and I look forward to our future time together.
So there was my conversation with Scott McKain, a keynote speaker, CSP, a member of the Professional Speakers Hall of Fame, a member of the Sales and Marketing Hall of Fame, and the author of 7 books, including Iconic: How Organizations and Leaders Attain, Sustain, and Regain the Ultimate Level of Distinction. Let's take a look at 3 key takeaways from our conversation with him. First, great reminder that I've heard Scott speak to before, but it's always worth another reminder, even more so today. As he said, if we don't stand out, then why would they choose us? It's a great question to ask, even when choosing a podcast. We're choosing something instead of something else. And a big thank you to everyone for choosing this podcast. Second, Another thing Scott said, and I'll quote, "You can't differentiate what you can't define. If you can't say this is who I am," which also means that I've got to say what I am not, then you can't create enough clarity in the marketplace to be known for anything. For him, at one point, he was a mile wide and an inch deep, but then he learned to focus more closely and then make certain that focus is more relevant to your customers and your audience. Third, the principles of iconic performance are the two factors that Scott say people will judge you on, which are 1, promise, and 2, performance. Those that did well during and after the pandemic adhered to and followed through on those principles. Iconic organizations continue to get better by fixing the process and not just applying a Band-Aid to the problem. Most businesses aren't willing to do this. And a rare fourth, go Google Scott McKain and the Taxi Terry story. It's a fantastic tale that you'll remember about delivering the ultimate customer experience. It should easily be worth your time. Got a question? Send me an email to kenneth@asharksperspective.com. Thank you again for the privilege of your time, and I am so thankful to everyone who listens. Thank you to the amazing sponsors, Invoke and Drips. If you would, then please consider writing a review and letting me know your thoughts on the show. So it's time to be iconic, be distinctive. Please join us on the next episode of A Shark's Perspective.